Hey guys, so before we get into today's video, you might have noticed that I am a huge fan of Dr. Jordan Peterson. Peterson is a renowned psychologist who brings the language and perspective of psychology to exploring the ideas that have shaped our society, especially the ideas of the Judeo-Christian tradition.
What? Are you saying that no one is really an atheist deep down?
I didn't say no one was.
Okay.
I said that most of the people who claim to be atheists aren't. So this is why I like Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment.
He has tons of content on YouTube that any person of any faith or political persuasion should check out. If you want to start, I suggest looking for videos of him talking about God or about the Bible for a good taste of his unique and powerful perspective. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Jacob Hansen, here with Thoughtful Faith. And today I am joined by my friend, Jana Spangler. Jana.
Hi, Jacob.
Hey, thanks for coming on. So just so everyone knows, Jana is an integral professional coach with Symmetry Solutions, and your specialty is in faith transitions. Is that correct?
Yeah, I work with a lot of people who are in faith transitions. I work with mixed faith families, mixed faith marriages, just any. So I have a particular emphasis, not just in faith transitions, but in relationship.
Awesome. Very cool. And also, everyone should know that she is an alumnus of the Living School, where she studied contemplative spiritual traditions under Father Richard Rohr, who's a pretty well-known person. And tell everybody a little bit about that real quick.
Yeah, that's a 2-year program. I did it from 2017 to 2019. And Richard Rohr is a Catholic priest, a Franciscan, in the Franciscan tradition. And he runs this school through the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I spent some time down in Albuquerque, just a week at a time over the course of the program, and then did a lot of studies online. But it's basically learning about contemplative Christian thought. They use other kinds of wisdom streams in that, but it's based in Christianity. So I learned a lot about that, and then how we use our contemplation, our mysticism, our direct connection with God to then inform how we bless our communities. So that's kind of the thrust of what the Living School is.
Awesome. And then now you've also been involved in a whole variety of different podcasts, Sunstone, you're on Mormon Stories with John DeLynn, Faith Matters, Richard Osler had you on his, any others of note that you can think of off the top of your head?
Sure. Last You Said It, LatterDay Contemplation. I'm going to have an interview coming out soon with LatterDay Struggles. Those are Almost Awakened is one that I've helped co-host.
That's one of Bill Reel's podcasts.
That's one of Bill Reel's podcasts. So I've been a guest on that podcast and also helped co-host over the summer for a couple months. So yeah, those are some biggies.
Awesome. Now, one of the reasons, just so everyone knows, this came together today is because Jana also is a participant in the Facebook group that I moderate and run online, Thoughtful Saints, and we have a pretty diverse crowd in there, honestly. People from all different areas of belief and stuff, and there's a lot of interaction. And Jana and I tend to disagree a lot.
Yes, we do.
and I think we come from very different perspectives. And there have been times in the group where I know you have felt like maybe you weren't fully understood or that you were misrepresented. And when someone, it's kind of a trigger for me, as it were. If someone says that I don't understand them, like, I can deal with not agreeing with someone, right? And I'm sure that we have plenty that we disagree on. But if a person says that I don't understand them, I feel like, okay, I gotta fix that, because disagreement I'm cool with, but I hate it when people misunderstand me. And so I want to give people that chance. And so today, what I was hoping we could do is discuss some things, and hopefully as we discuss these different things that I can steelman your position, not necessarily look for us to agree, but to at least get more clarity. Does that sound like a good plan?
It's fine with me. I also have no problem with disagreement. I have no problem with, people having their different viewpoints and perspectives they're coming from. And I appreciate you wanting to to understand me more, because it isn't fun to be misrepresented. That's the biggest problem I have, is lack of context, not really giving someone a full say. And especially with someone who comes from a perspective like mine, it's really hard to get to in a Facebook group, truly. So.
And I think that's kind of where I think would be a good place to start. Is I want to understand a little bit about just the way that your relation is to the church, right? Like most people describe me as sort of an Orthodox member. Now, I don't necessarily like that terminology, just because Orthodox can mean different things to different people. And I know that I have positions that might not fit exactly within kind of perfect orthodoxy. And so we don't necessarily need to put a label on it, but I guess something that I wanted to do was try to understand what the way you view your relationship to the church, because we're both members of the same church, right? And you would consider yourself an active believing member. Is that?
Yeah.
Is that?
I've got 2 callings. I got a word calling. I've got a state calling. Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. And so, but yet there's so much difference between us, right? And so I guess to start off is, what do you view, how would you describe your relationship to the church?
Yeah. I don't know how else to say it, but that I'm a member of the church, lifelong. I come from some pretty intense pioneer ancestry. My ancestors on several lines go back to the start of this whole endeavor. So being LDS is just deeply in my bones. It's a deep part of my identity and who I am. And my relationship has been complicated over the last 10 years. It has. I kind of feel like if I had a Facebook in a relationship with the church, it would say it's complicated, right? And it's hard to have a label for it. It's hard to define. I love my church. I probably came from a place where, up until about 10 years ago, I probably disagreed with very little. I mean, I disagreed with some. I wasn't an automaton, but I agreed with most of what was going on in the church. And I just had kind of a big switch in perspective, probably about 10 years ago, that invited me into a more complex way of seeing the church, the world, my place in it. And it's been really hard to define ever since.
And what would you say are kind of, when you say it's complex, what kind of path does that go down? What does that look like?
Oh, I don't even know if I know how to explain it. For me, it is much more internally driven than it ever was before. Maybe that's one of the hallmarks of what has happened for me over the last 10 years. I think I was very much someone who looked to the structure, looked to the system, looked to other people to help me understand the world and God and everything else. And I didn't fully recognize it at the time, but coming to where I am now and looking back, for me, and I don't think this is how it is for everybody, but for me, I was not able to access a really deep relationship with God with the way that I had been raised.
So and that's interesting, because I think that I hear that a lot from people. So one of the things that is happening within the church right now, and I've been involved with different people online, is that your story is not unique.
For sure.
There's been a significant number of people that have shifted more, like you hear Dr. Julie Hanks talking about, personal authority. I've heard other people talk about that. I know that you've kind of pushed that idea of finding sort of this inner voice, inner authority.
I don't know if I'd push. I would say I've invited the possibility for anyone who feels that that's a call for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And regardless, what I would say is that there's been a lot of people that find themselves in that position where they're feeling that called towards this sort of taking more of a, granting more authority to the voice inside rather than to the external authorities of the church. And then they find themselves kind of in conflict with the church and the authority structure of it. Right. And so, how do you reconcile sort of the conflict that exists between people that find themselves conflicted between what the church teaches, like for instance, on gay marriage or something like that, and then their own inner feelings towards that?
Yeah, it's a complicated subject to talk about. It really is, because it's not as if I take my inner authority and now the church doesn't matter. Now I don't listen to anybody else. I'm only listening to myself. I think sometimes we imagine that people are taking a stance of, well, whatever makes me feel good, and I don't have standards anymore, and and that's really not what is happening for myself and for people that I've worked with who or talked to. I talk to people about this all the time. And so let's see. Tell me again the question so I'm not getting off on a tangent.
Well, no, I was going to say, when we
How do I reconcile those differences that come up?
Yeah. I mean, when there just are these issues where there's a conflict of authority, right?
Yeah.
Between, and so like I, for instance, have dealt with a lot of Calvinists and Protestants, and they have the doctrine of sola scriptura, which says that the ultimate authority is what Scripture says.
Right.
And then we have a different approach to that as Latter-day Saints.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of this question of what is the ultimate authority for any given individual.
So one of the ways, and I got this from Richard Rohr, and I have adapted it to our LDS faith, because he's speaking from a very Catholic way. I mean, as I say this, it's going to sound very, very Catholic. You'll recognize it, and it's an adaptation of the Wesleyan quadrangle, right? So, as far as an epistemological approach, Richard Rohr sees this as a triangle, and the front wheel is experience. Now he's collapsing, rational thought and other things into this, but he has said this, and I think he's right, that even if you believe that you are sola scriptura, what we have to recognize about humanity is that we are interpreting always through our lens. There's enough contradiction out there. We always have to, whether we're trying to or not, we have a lens. Whether we recognize it or not, we have a lens. So experience is always that front wheel. And there are other wheels. And Scripture is a wheel. And for Catholics, tradition is a wheel. So when I think about that from, the way that I have approached my LDS faith, I would say I started out my life with a giant front wheel, like old-fashioned tricycle, giant front wheel that was prophetic revelation. And then I had these back wheels. I had a personal experience, or personal revelation, and Scripture, and those are wheels. But I feel like over the last 10 years, I have felt like it has been more appropriate for me to put that personal revelation in front. And, you can shrink that wheel down to a more normal tricycle. And then we have these, prophetic revelation and Scripture as the back wheels. So this can kind of help us balance things so that we're not just imagining that, I'm Brian David Mitchell, and I think it's okay to kidnap Elizabeth Smart. Like, we don't want to be off in the weeds that way. If I don't see something in what is moving through me and what God is moving through me that has not had some sort of basis in tradition or Scripture, then I probably ought to rethink that.
Yeah.
Right. And what I've recognized is that in my old way of thinking about things, there were a lot of things I disagreed with the church. They just didn't feel as big. But for the most part, I was very much in line with the big things in the church. And so I didn't notice as much all the ways that I was like, maybe not to that particular thing.
Yeah, and I'm curious too, because one of the things is that, you know, to be a Latter-day Saint,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what does it mean to be a Latter-day Saint?
Mm-hmm.
Does it mean that your records are just, you know, on the records of the church?
Mm-hmm.
I personally have the view that, you know, if you're a Latter-day Saint, you're someone who has made covenants
Mm-hmm.
and is striving to keep those covenants.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also say that, you know, a person should hold certain beliefs, right? Like if I said I'm a Catholic,
Mhm.
you're going to look at me and be like, "Oh, hey, you're a Catholic. That means there are some things that follow in your head from that. You believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ, right? You believe in the supremacy of the Pope amongst the other bishops. You believe that they're the direct descendant of Peter, right? There are beliefs that go along with the label of Catholic. And I guess one of the questions that I have for Latter-day Saints, because one of the things that's tricky is I'm trying to, like, I want to find out where are the lines here between when someone is acting within what a Latter-day Saint is or not. Like, are there requirements for someone being a Latter-day Saint? And are there beliefs that are required to be a Latter-day Saint? What are your thoughts on that? Because a lot of Orthodox members are concerned about that.
Sure. And I can understand why, right? It's interesting because as you say, this is what Catholics believe. You know, my experience with Father Richard has shown me that there's a wide variety within that. And there are a lot of really conservative Catholics who want to exclude Richard as saying he's Catholic. And yet he, much to the chagrin of some conservative Catholics, actually had an audience with the Pope last year, and the Pope was happy with what he's doing and how
Well, a
he's
lot of
opening
Catholics
things
in the
up.
U.S. have a problem with the Pope right now, so
That
I
is
guess
true
that
too.
kind
And
of
it
happens.
would be probably those people. There would probably be a big Venn diagram there. But I think for me, one of the things that I've started to notice is that there is a much wider pool of belief within the church than I was ever privy to before. And one of the things that keeps us from understanding how differently different people do this thing is that we have a culture of we don't have a culture of disagreement, you know, within gospel doctrine. Some words maybe more than others, but for the most part, most words it doesn't operate the same way like maybe a Jewish gathering would. You know, they kind of have a culture of disagreement and they're good with it. They like, you know, let's get in there and really talk about things. But I find that most people really don't in any given word. They kind of show up and fit in with whatever is going on there. And it's people get kind of squeamish when we disagree. But what I hear in my office is very, very different. And I start to notice how, especially, a mixed faith marriage will come in. Someone is really questioning their faith and they recognize that they have been in a mixed faith marriage from the day they were married. They just never knew it because we don't really speak sometimes deeply enough to understand what those differences are. So I don't know. I found this in my own family.
I guess, but isn't, I look at that and I say, well, unity, I would hope that we have a greater unity of the faith, because if we are like, I don't look at diversity of ideology in the church as a good thing. I look at it as a weakness, because what that does is that, you know, if Zion is a people of one heart and of one mind, the more we are divided and have different opinions and widely, and I'm not talking about little things. I'm talking about like, you know, people who don't believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ, right? That kind of stuff, you know, we need to have some sort of a basis that brings us all together.
Sure.
And I guess, I mean, what do you see as the, you know, do you think that's important, or do you see that, because there's a sense in which I feel like we're bringing this up as though this diversity of opinion and disagreement is a positive thing. I think it's good that we have spaces where we can talk about the things that we disagree about.
Mhm.
But I don't know that disagreement means that, oh, that's great. Because if we have a unity around Christ, if that is the goal,
Yep.
then disagreement's a problem, right?
I don't think so. I see
How
it
so?
differently. I mean, I see more of, I believe in a Zion people, but we can't be a Zion people without difference, because we just are. I mean, you can't erase what is. There is so much diversity among people, so much diversity. And I actually find that when I'm talking to people, it's the lack of ability to have some diversity that makes people feel like being part of this church doesn't work for them and is harmful to them. So I see it more as the analogy of the body of Christ, that we have an eye, we have an ear, we have different functions, we see things differently. I actually see this really deeply in Joseph Smith. I think he was a person who really wanted freedom of thought. I think about, I wish I could remember the name of the gentleman, but from the history of the church, there's an instance where an older gentleman was teaching some theology some doctrine that the High Council was not happy with, and they brought him up and kind of was trying him on this. And Joseph Smith, reflecting on it, said, I didn't like that the old man was being brought up in this way. Latter-day Saints are not ones who have to believe certain creeds or be asked out. That is more like the Methodist. He was always throwing Methodists under the bus. So was Brigham. But I don't know what it was about the Methodists, but they had a thing. But he says that's like the Methodist. That is not the Latter-day Saint. This is not what we're about. And I feel like Joseph, I see so much in his writings that he was really wanting freedom of thought. He really cared about agency. He really cared about that. Now, he didn't want people destroying what he was trying to build, and there was a lot of excommunication going on during the time, but it typically wasn't necessarily for creed. He didn't really like that idea, and I don't really like that idea. I think bring it all, and let's see.
And I agree.
Yeah.
The question is where are the limits, right? So here's an analogy I like to use for Zion. You have a bunch of different instruments, right? But they're all playing the same songs together in unity and in harmony. You can't just have people going out and playing whatever song they want. There is the music, and each of these instruments makes a different sound and is different in its own way, but they're meant to be harmonized together to create something beautiful. And so diversity run amok is a problem.
And what would that look like?
For instance, people who reject the divinity of Christ, for instance. Like, can you be a Christian and reject the divinity of Jesus Christ?
So if you have somebody who wants to be in communion with you and they come into the building and they say, you know what, I don't know that I really believe in the divinity of Christ. What do we do with that person? I wouldn't ask them out. I would ask them to stay, and I would get curious.
But can a person retain the label of Catholic, or should they retain the label of Catholic if they reject the divinity of Jesus Christ?
Yeah. So personally, I'm not a huge fan of that kind of boundary maintenance. I think that Jesus was trying to teach us something different. I know that the naked pastor is people are not a big fan of naked pastor, at least in the group. But there is I wish I had an example of it, but there is a picture that he has, a cartoon, and it has men with these giant pencils, and they're drawing these grids and lines. And Jesus is over there with his pencil upside down, and he's erasing the lines. I see that in his ministry. I see what Jesus was doing is he's taking the woman at the well who was defying by all Jewish law, the sexual mores of her day, and he chooses her to be the first person that he reveals himself to. He brings together in his disciples people from different areas of their lives that would never have talked to each other, that would never have come together if it weren't for him inviting them in. Like I see with the Good Samaritan, with a lot of his parables, he's trying to break down all of those lines of this is the way it's supposed to be. the workers in the vineyard. Because our minds want that. Our minds want the boundary maintenance. We want to be safe. We want to know what's right. But I in Jesus, I see a different message. I see a message of, you know what? Get out of here. Get into your heart. The parables I'm teaching you are not going to make sense to your brain. It's never going to make sense to you to pay someone the same amount for an hour of work that's done a full day of work. Our brains can't do that. Let's drop down into a different way of thinking, which I believe is what repentance is. It's metanoia, a new way of thinking, and see the divinity in the other person. That's parable's never going to make sense to me until I know somebody's story of why they showed up.
And let me see if I can steelman that for a second. So essentially, you're seeing that we in society create these lines and these boundaries, like this is what it means to be a Catholic or not be a Catholic, or to be a Latter-day Saint or not. And you believe that Jesus was essentially erasing those rigid boundaries that people were creating. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things he was doing.
And so, I hear that, and one of the challenges I have as I look at scripture is like Jesus Christ talking about dividing the sheep from the goats.
Sure.
In our church, talking about the division of the kingdoms of glory. I see a division between those who are baptized and those who are not baptized. Terms of the covenants, commandments that draw very specific lines around what is morally correct and what is morally wrong. And so I do agree that Jesus may have been erasing arbitrary and or unnecessary boundaries, but truth itself creates lines. Like that's what the truth does. Truth distinguishes one thing from another, right? And so it creates lines. And oftentimes people don't like that because those lines will divide and separate things. And so while I can agree to an extent when I say that there's the arbitrary lines or the lines that can't be there have to be certain lines. I mean, what does it mean to be a Catholic if you don't believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ?
Well, talk to Catholics. They don't put those kinds of lines around things. People are Catholic if they want to, and they show up on Easter and Christmas, and maybe not at all, but they still proudly wear that, that label of I'm Catholic. That's what I am.
And I guess,
but I will say this.
The thing that I run into though is just what does that label mean? If it
means whatever that person,
just whatever you want it to mean, then the label becomes meaningless.
Maybe, but maybe they should be meaningless. Maybe we should just be asking, well, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to you to be a Catholic? You are wearing that label. What does that mean to you? How do you move within that? What is inspiring to you about that? That's more interesting to me than, well, do you wear the label or not? We've got to take that label away from you because you're not doing it right. I don't think that is the message of Jesus. I just don't see it that way. But I also I want to agree with what you're saying. I'm not saying there should be, it's all fuzzy and everything goes either. I start speaking this way and it gets taken that way, and it's not what I'm saying. Jesus was actually this amazing example of how to challenge these boundaries and thoughts without throwing it out. He didn't throw it out. He went to synagogue till the day he died. He was part of it. He wasn't saying, reject all that. It's, whatever those guys are doing, just reject it. He didn't do that. He did challenge the religious authorities of the time. He did say, you know what, and he would refuse to answer certain questions in certain ways because he knew it could be very easily misconstrued if we're in this all or nothing, right or wrong. He was this example of showing us how to do both. It's a both and, it's not an either or. We can have lines. Of course we can have lines. And there are times when those lines get in the way of the first and second great commandments.
And maybe this gets to the to some of what we talked about with authority. Who determines the lines? Like who determines the lines for if you are or are not a Latter-day Saint, for instance?
Yeah. I don't think any human is very good at doing that for another human. I think it takes an extraordinary amount of time to get to know somebody and to understand them well enough to make those lines for anybody. And I don't think most of us are qualified. So I would say leave it to God and the person.
So do you think that I mean, because we have authority structures within the church
Yeah.
that determine if someone is actually a member of the church or not. So a typical answer to this would be that it is the priesthood authorities that draw the lines around what is accepted and not accepted in the church. Are you?
I would agree that that is how it works. Yes.
Is that how it should work?
I don't know. I don't know. I
mean,
see problems with it.
See,
I
Orthodox,
see benefit to it, and I see problems with it.
I mean, as an Orthodox member, that's, what I'm sustaining, right? I'm sustaining the brethren that they have the authority to draw those lines.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And so should a person who sustains the authorities, as an active member of the church, is that not, what does it mean to sustain someone if you're not recognizing that authority?
I didn't say you're not recognizing the authority. I'm saying that sustaining them is recognizing they have that authority. They can do that.
I see. And so, I mean, one of the things that is tough for me when we break down all these borders and barriers is that you ultimately have to draw new lines somewhere, right? I don't necessarily think that you're saying to just, like you were saying, to Steelman you again, you're not saying to get rid of all boundaries.
Right.
But you are essentially redrawing them. Is that fair to say?
I don't know that I'm redrawing them. I don't have that authority. I'm just telling you what I see, and if I see a problem with it, I'm going to say this is a problem. And I've seen I've seen it be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it be a problem many, many, many times. And I look at it and say, if Jesus were here, and of course I'm seeing Jesus through my lens, you're going to see Jesus through your lens. Everyone is going to see it through your lens. When we talk about Jesus, we're usually talking more about ourselves than we are about anything that directly resembles Jesus. But and the same is for Joseph Smith. I always liked it. That's a Rorschach test. What do you think of Joseph Smith? You can pretty much tell where a Latter-day Saint is by how they talk about it. It doesn't say much about the prophet, but it certainly says something about us.
Is there a way to tell, though, if someone has a correct, a better or worse conception of Jesus? Like if I think of Jesus as a white supremacist, leader of Nazi Germany who is against the Jews, you would say that is an incorrect conception of Jesus. Is that correct?
I would say that is a very unhelpful one.
But
very unhelpful by the fruits. The fruits are terrible.
And I agree, but according to what standard, right? Like the standard.
Well, I don't see anything in the New Testament that makes me think that Jesus is a white supremacist. But,
okay, perfect. So you would say that we can utilize scripture to evaluate if someone's conception of Jesus is accurate or inaccurate.
It's a back wheel, and we have to have the humility to understand that our worldview will shift the way we see it. It shifts the way we see it.
Yeah.
If I'm going to see more of a social justice Jesus, I could back that up. You're going to see more of a boundary drawing Jesus. They're both there. They're both there.
But is there a way for us to utilize good exegesis of the text to understand which one of those conceptions is more logical?
I mean, sure. I'm a big fan of exegesis. I'm a fan of scholars who take the time. I know I'm a big fan of Dan McClellan, but people who take that kind of time to understand the roots of these things and the translations and the this and that, and I think that's absolutely useful. And I think that the gospel is accessible to anyone. It's accessible to a 5-year-old. It's accessible to anyone wherever they are, whether they lack the ability to do that kind of exegesis, whether they have the ability to do anything. I think that the gospel is democratized for all human beings.
Yeah, and there's an extent to which I agree with that.
Yeah.
With that in mind,
yeah,
as we're talking about some of these borders or boundaries, in fact, let me pull up a little slide here that I was going to show earlier, but I think again in the spirit of trying to understand one another and to understand things that we're talking about, So like we use words all the time, right? Like we might talk about a cat, but words point to notions,
Sure.
right? And you're gonna have different words that point to different things. And so if I have a very clear understanding of what a cat is, then we can communicate and use the word cat because we both know what that is.
Yes.
Now, as you go on, though, there are other words like love, for instance. I know you and I have kind of gone back and forth a little bit over this, where it's like, well, what is love pointing to? Like, what do we mean by that? And I'm not talking about that in particular. We could replace this, for instance, with Latter-day Saint, for instance. And my point is that without a clear set of boundaries that say what something is and what something is not, what love is and what love isn't, then the concept of love becomes very hazy, very meaningless, right?
So I would push back. I think the meaning of love is hazy. I think it's, I use the word ineffable. There are certain experiences in life that are ineffable. It's an experience, right? A cat is something much more concrete. Love, suffering, a spiritual experience that you've had. Having me try to explain to you what that is in my humanity, to be in a place of love, I find that definitions of certain things, like the notion of love, is much better suited to poets, to mystics, to songs, to experience, than it is to try to explain to another person what it is. Because to me, it's the experience of God.
And that is something that is, and I agree, to a large extent, that there are words that are hard to define. However, that also means when we use those words, people aren't going to understand what we're talking about because we don't even necessarily know what we mean by the words that we're using.
Yeah, I think that's why we need story. I think that's why we need myth. I think that's why we need to share experiences with one another. I think it's the closest we come, is really, really diving in to understand someone, and not just the thoughts and the definitions that they're having in their head, but who are you? What is it like to be you? What is it like to be a human? What is it like to be a Catholic who doesn't believe in the divinity of God or Christ?
So
what is it like to be you?
So, but to some extent, let's go to the Catholic example. If someone says that they're a Catholic and they don't believe in God and they don't believe in Jesus, well, then why are they adopting that label? They're just creating confusion.
Well, they're creating confusion for some. They may not be in confusion themselves. I mean, the Jewish faith has matured to the point that there are rabbis who are atheists. Like that is acceptable. They have carved out a way.
Well, why don't they call
to
themselves something different so that we can understand? Like
they probably don't care if you understand.
What was that?
They don't care if you understand. They're doing what they are doing themselves, and if people want an atheistic rabbi, they can go find one.
Well, but if
I don't see any problem with that.
If these identity categories are we just make them up to be whatever that we determine them, rather than language and certain benchmarks that determine a particular identity category, then I mean, I could claim that I'm a Black person. Could I do that?
And of course not. And I'm telling you, I'm not erasing lines. I'm not erasing boundaries, but I am making them broader. So I am making them broader. So I'm guessing if you talk to a rabbi who is an atheist and you said, what is it like to be you? What is it about you that wants to remain, in that role of a rabbi? I'm guessing that we would learn something about that person. And it may change our mind about how strictly we need to have a boundary. Or because my question would be, what's the problem with it? Why do you, Jacob Hansen, need to understand the label of what that atheist Jew is doing?
Just so that I can understand the difference between a person who's an actual believing person in the Yahweh of the Bible and who is, practicing the Jewish law, versus someone, and that's who a Jewish rabbi you would expect to be, and be a teacher of the Torah.
An Orthodox one.
And then to make a distinction between that person and the person who is something different. It's kind of like the distinction between me saying, I mean, we use these distinctions all the time. If I'm going to apply for a scholarship and I say that I'm an African American and I'm not an African American because I don't meet the criteria for what that word means to say you're an African American, I say, but I identify that way. That
feels like a different thing to me. If you are, if the only place I could imagine, I really need to know what kind of rabbi this person is and why they're doing what they're doing is if I am looking for a temple, or if I'm looking for a synagogue, I'm looking for a place to go. Then I probably need to understand those things. But why do I care if that's not my thing?
Well, and like, with it can be very important. For instance, like right now, there's a huge debate going on about what a woman is, right? If I say a woman is an adult human female, that's a particular category. That is a notion of what I mean when I say woman. If someone then says, well, a woman is anyone who identifies as such, then you have altered what that word points to. That word now points to something very different. Just like if you were to say, to be a Black American means that it's anyone who identifies that way. You've you've erased the category of people who are actually African American. Or with women, like you've actually erased the linguistic distinction between of an adult human female.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
I'm not terrible. I understand the line of thought. I also just don't agree with it. I don't think you have to erase a binary to recognize people who do not conform to the binary. I don't think you have to do that. I don't erase a binary, but I recognize that there are some people who don't conform.
Well, and let me ask. So if somebody came out and said that they were an integral professional life coach, and they had done none of the stuff that you had done, and they just claimed that as their title, and you had all sorts of people doing that, and that you then went into a room and said, well, I'm an integral professional coach. That doesn't bother you that people could just claim to be, any title that they want, regardless of if they meet the criteria of that title?
Well, there's claiming if you have a credential attached to something, then that's problematic. I mean, if I go around telling people that I am a licensed social worker, the people at Symmetry Solutions, they're licensed social workers, they're marriage and family therapists, they're people with a certain credential. If I go around telling people I'm a therapist, that's a problem. That's a problem because of my credential and because professionally people come to me, want to know who they're dealing with. I am in a profession where anyone can go out and say I'm a life coach. And that is a thing. And people, when they hear I'm a life coach, often imagine what it is that I'm doing. They think I'm like Tony Robbins and I'm trying to make everyone $1 million. That's not the kind of life coach I am. But
and so those categories matter to you.
Well, because
the distinction between them matters, correct?
Is a credential. As a credential. In that way, like if somebody is not coming to me for help, or if they are trying to quote me in some way, then it matters. But if you're just calling me a life coach, I don't care. If you're saying you're a life coach and this other person is a life coach, if you're saying you're a life coach and so is Tony Robbins, yes, but we're very different. And unless someone is engaging my services, I really don't care. It doesn't bother me. Well, we have different credentials. But if someone calls themselves an integral,
they represent the category, though, that people are using linguistically to talk about stuff. So, for instance, if we're talking about Catholics, and we have no idea what that means in the sense that there are Catholics that believe in God, there are Catholics that don't believe in God, there are Catholics who are practicing Muslims as well. At some point you go, well, what does it even mean to be a Catholic? And it erases the category from any sort of a meaningful thing because it doesn't distinguish it from other things.
Oh, I think it does. I don't worry about those things, right? I think it's up to every institution and the leaders of that institution to decide what those categories are. They have that power. It's not for me to decide who's Catholic. The Catholic Church seems to be okay with people never going to church and calling themselves Catholic. So right on. I'm fine with that. it doesn't matter to me unless I'm engaging with somebody. There is a big difference with engaging with somebody. If someone is calling themselves an integral professional life coach, that is a particular credential. So of course there's a problem with that. If I go around calling myself a medical doctor and I don't have the credential, that's a problem. But it's not a problem for me that life coach means a lot of different things in our world. It does. And people won't know what I am unless they want to engage me and want to know what my particular stream of my profession is about. So, it is what it is. And it matters where it matters. It doesn't matter at a cocktail party. I don't really care.
And so a Latter-day Saint, for instance, does a Latter-day Saint have to believe anything?
I don't know. I know Latter-day Saints that are very confused about what they believe. I still think they're Latter-day Saints.
Well, why would someone claim the title? For instance, let's say that somebody thought that Joseph Smith was a liar, there's no God, that Christ isn't divine, and that person claimed to, I'm a Latter-day Saint. There's no problem with that?
What's the problem?
It's that they aren't a Latter-day Saint. They don't meet the criteria of what someone thinks of when they think of a Latter-day Saint. To be a Latter-day Saint means something. It means that you are one thing and not something else.
I don't know. This is my point. If my sister and I both said we're Latter-day Saints, you would not understand that we see the world so vastly differently. It wasn't until I started to go through this faith transition where I was talking to my sister and we're talking about the nature of God, and I'm having all these problems with this conditionally loving God, and she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. God's love is completely unconditional. And I'm like, what are you smoking? And we recognize that we even view the nature of God so vastly differently. And so my ears have perked up ever since. It's been years. And it's both. People see it both ways. There is no monolith of what it is to be a Latter-day Saint.
Well, and I would agree, if you get down into the nitty-gritty, everyone has differences of belief, but we generally categorize people by, at least you two both believed in God, right? You at least, could we say that, could you be a theist and not believe in God?
I don't think that would, by definition, work very well.
Well, then what is the definition of a Latter-day Saint?
I think that's a good question. And who gets to decide it, right? Because I do know people who are like me, pioneer ancestry. It is so deeply in me that if I decided to leave the church one day, I can totally see myself saying, no, I'm ethnically a Latter-day Saint. This is my identity. This is how I was raised from the time I was born. There is something so in me.
See, but that isn't
what that tradition is.
Erase the definition. That's just to say that the definition of a Latter-day Saint is to have an ethnic identity that you have, that you care about, and it alters the meaning of what a Latter-day Saint is from a person who has entered into a certain kind of covenant relationship with God and are striving to keep that covenant, into someone who merely has a particular ethnic identity.
It can be, or it could mean for you, it means a whole lot more. And we won't know what that is for somebody unless we ask, unless we actually get to know one another. And when does that matter? Maybe it matters if you're reading a book they wrote. Maybe it matters if you're going to hear them speak, or if you're going to a retreat that they're putting on, or that you're listening to a podcast like this. That's where it matters. I don't know that it matters other than that. Why do I need to know what my neighbor across the street, if they are believing all the things in all the right ways? I'm uninterested in that. And I frankly believe that Joseph and Jesus would be as well. But that's just my view.
So why does it matter? Well, if you work with mixed faith marriages.
I do.
And they can be challenging for a lot of people, right?
Absolutely.
And so if I'm a Catholic and I'd like to enter into a marriage with a Catholic, and then I have someone telling me that they're Catholic, and then they tell me, well, I don't believe in God or the Pope or any of that stuff, then they kind of just deceived me by using the label of Catholic. I assumed that they had certain beliefs based on that label that they used. So don't these labels help us to understand what people actually are?
There are very few people who go into mixed faith marriage with that kind of intention of I'm just going to say I'm a Latter-day Saint, but I'm not going to do anything with it. Most people if we are doing this thing right, we know who we're marrying. Some people
and
will say,
most people assume when someone says that I'm a Catholic,
Mhm.
they assume. But what we were saying is that my point is that when we erase the boundaries, that's no longer a safe assumption. If you say,
why have an assumption? If I'm going to marry someone, I'm not going on an assumption. I'm going to learn who they are. I'm going to figure out what kind of Latter-day Saint are you? Because there are all kinds of Latter-day Saints. There are some Latter-day Saints who want to do all the things and go to the temple weekly and, that really want to dive in. And there are other ones who say, you know what? I actually want to ski once in a while on a Sunday, and that's the kind of LDS person I am. One of the jokes is always like, tell me what kind of Latter-day Saint family you grew up in. Was it a caffeine or a no caffeine? Did you guys drink Coke? Did you not drink Coke? Like, we have to know those things about who we're marrying. It's not dangerous to me to have someone say they're a Latter-day Saint. How is that dangerous to me? Unless I'm engaging them in some meaningful way that I need to know that, it doesn't matter. Why do I care?
Well, I would say just so that we know what we're talking about, for clarity's sake.
Sure. Then
like you can
get to know that person.
why can't a person say, yeah, I'm not a Latter-day Saint, I don't believe anymore?
They can.
Well, what I'm saying is, like, isn't that the more honest thing to do? Doesn't that create more clarity? Because the idea is to avoid confusion. Like, the point of language is to convey ideas that we have to other people.
And some language doesn't do that with just a word. Sometimes we have to get to know people to understand what they mean by it. That's how language is. Not every piece of language can be defined to that level. So how is it dangerous? I just really want to understand what's dangerous about it.
So we have these words, and then there are different notions that people have.
Sure.
And that's fine. People can have whatever notion that they want attached to a particular word. And we might ask the question, well, which notion that a person has about a given word, like Latter-day Saint, is right? And that all comes down to, like, by what standard are we judging this word, right? So for instance, if I say that I'm an African American, we would use the standard of my biology to determine if I actually am an African American or not, right?
Sure.
We can see if it aligns with a particular standard. In other words, the straight line is the line that represents the African American heritage, biology, genetics, and then you can see that mine doesn't align with that. It's not justified. The definition that I have given doesn't accord to a particular standard, right? And so the question becomes, with these notions, like to be a Latter-day Saint, to be a Catholic, like, what is the line that we're using to determine if something aligns with that category or not? And this isn't just I'm using the example of Latter-day Saint or Catholic, like these religious categories. We use the same thing for, like, if someone says that they're a woman, right? Like, how could you tell if that person was actually a woman or not? How would we know if they were correct or not? Right? If it has to align with something. So what is that thing if someone claims to be a woman? Like, what is it that determines if someone is a woman or is not a woman?
Yeah. I mean, this is a debate that's happening in our society right now. And there are people who want to put some really strict boundaries around that. And there are people who fall outside of that. And I see a lot of harm in their lives when someone is trying to put something on them that does not align with what they feel. And I know that sounds squishy, and I know it sounds dangerous, but I'm still trying to figure out how it's dangerous. I have transgender friends. I have intersex friends. I have transgender friends. They're not hurting anybody. I don't understand why we're so upset with them, because I just see these people who, when they tell me their stories, who am I to tell somebody that you have to live your life in a way that makes you suicidal? I have a hard time doing that. So I don't know that I want how to get into all of these nitpicky definitions, but I do know that there are people who don't fall neatly in a binary. That the vast majority of us do.
And so, I mean, like, in the church, in the context of the church,
yeah,
like, we have ordinances that are based on a person's particular gender, and the church has specified that the standard by which that is judged is by their biological sex at birth.
Correct.
And so to say that gender, like man, and like, does that term matter? It seems to absolutely matter. And there's all sorts of terms like that because they create the distinctions.
Yeah, I agree. It matters. I don't erase the binary.
And so I wanted to also just to kind of understand when it comes to something like apostasy, for instance, like the church has standards for if someone is outside of the bounds of their covenant and those lines, right?
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that we shouldn't have those lines that are drawn?
I think there are very few times that I would be behind excommunicating anyone for apostasy. I'm with Joseph. I don't think we should have certain creeds that we have to be or not be a Latter-day Saint. I have some personal, pretty wounding experience around this because a dear friend was excommunicated, and the biggest problem I had with the entire process is that not one person ever came to her to have a real understanding of who she was. And they were conflating her professional stances with her personal stances. And she is one of hundreds and hundreds of people in her profession who believe the same way. So we
was this Natasha Helfer?
Natasha
Helfer, yeah.
It's completely arbitrary and capricious how it happened to her, and I had a front row to it. I saw how about. I'd have to go back and count. It's been too long, but I wrote a whole document on 6 or 7 of the ways that the handbook was violated in handling her case.
So you don't, I mean, now I agree. There's a sense to which I agree. So I want to kind of grant something first. I agree that you can have too rigid of a standard of belief.
Yep.
Right. But you even say that you're not saying get rid of all boundaries. It just sounds like you want to draw new boundaries that are, or you're in favor of, let's say, you're in favor of erasing boundaries that you feel are arbitrary and or unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would behoove us to look at the harm we are causing by some of the boundaries that we have. I don't know that we're ever going to cause no harm, but I think that it would be a good thing. It would be a good practice among us to listen to the stories of people who get harmed by too rigid of boundaries. I think that would be a good spiritual practice for all of us.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm
not saying I'm the one that should redraw
I'm wondering,
them.
like, without getting into it, like what's a specific example of this that is a boundary that needs to be altered?
Well, I mean, I think Natasha is a good example. I mean, there should be a certain standard of level of pastoral care, of understanding a person,
and
of
what
getting
specifically.
To know them.
I guess, and again, I just want to try and get into something specific so we can really look at it. Like,
like what?
Well, I'm not super familiar with Natasha's particular case, but like what specifically is a boundary that you think that she got in trouble for that shouldn't be a boundary?
Well, I think if someone has a professional degree and part of their ethical obligation is to educate in that area, and she does with her, she is a sex therapist, marriage, family, and therapist. And if that professional opinion disagrees with a personal stance in the church, that's a difficult position. And that's a position that a lot of people in that profession, Latter-day Saint people, are in, as evidenced by the fact that there were about 700 Latter-day Saint therapists who signed a letter saying, this is problematic, what's happening. So, and it came down to the authority structure gave one man the ability to say yay or nay. And someone who hadn't.
Well, and I guess, I mean, the church doesn't if something runs contrary to church doctrine and or standards, like for instance, if a member is out encouraging a gay couple to go get married,
Mhm.
And they're a Latter-day Saint, and they're encouraging that.
No therapist worth their salt encourages anything.
Okay, and that's fine, but I guess that there are things that if you endorse certain positions that run contrary to the church, can a person just say, "Oh, well, that's what my profession, that's kind of the standards of my profession is to do that"?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, it's a question, right? This is a big ethical question. What if you're a physician and your particular skill set is dealing with gender affirming surgeries of some sort? You're going to be in an ethical pickle that you have to work
you
out
would
within yourselves.
and so like performing a mastectomy on perfectly healthy breasts for a Latter-day Saint physician
Mhm.
who would feel that is immoral or wrong,
Mhm.
or maybe doesn't and agrees with it and thinks that it's good, but
Mhm.
the church has a position against that.
Mhm.
Doesn't a Latter-day Saint ultimately, isn't part of what they're doing in their covenants is that there's no higher authority than God and his church
Yeah.
and
I mean,
his mouthpieces?
it's just a messy world out there, Jacob. And people who are in that position have to make the right decisions for themselves.
But
And it does happen. It really happens in a lot of therapy because people it is a tenet of therapy that you cannot lay your reality on somebody else. That is malpractice. That is malpractice. So
well, then I mean, the early martyrs were willing to die
Mhm.
rather than
Yep.
even say that they weren't Christians.
Mhm.
And now the modern Christian is unwilling to lock horns with their professional colleagues because
why are the martyrs the standard? I mean, who says this is the way that we should be? Like if
well,
we
I
have
mean, when we go to the
the
temple,
perfect
don't we
map,
make that covenant?
if we
At
have the
least for
perfect
covenant temple Latter-day Saints, certainly we pledge to give our lives if
yeah
necessary
yeah
for God and his kingdom.
yeah
And so isn't that the expectation? That we're willing to sacrifice anything necessary to obey God, that no
yeah,
sacrifice is too
and I
much?
think we have to work out what that means for us. Like we have to wrestle the angel, like Jacob. We if we are perfectly given lines of exactly how to be a Latter-day Saint, and if you're doing it right, this is the way you're doing it. That does not require the kind of soul wrestle that it requires to transform ourselves into a new creature. I mean, I remember years ago, this was before my faith got complicated. I was a gospel doctrine teacher, and we came across a certain part of the New Testament and talking about the Pharisees and other things in the lesson manual. And I just remember it occurred to me how grateful I was that I don't have all of those rules. That if you take something like keeping the Sabbath day holy, that there's a wide range of what that means for people. I know at the time I wasn't a runner. I knew a mission president who ran every Sunday. Like that was his spiritual practice. That is where he got to be alone. He got to be in his body, there with God. And for me at that time, that sounds like the last thing that would bring me close to God. I would be cursing. But often as Latter-day Saints, what we have, and I think this is human, right? I think this is the story in the New Testament a lot, is we want to have the boundaries. We want to make it easy. We want to know. And we imagine if I'm doing the most strict interpretation, if I'm staying in my church clothes all day, if I am allowing no media in except for church-centered things, then that must be the righteous way. And we can do that all in our head without ever having a conversation with God. To me, I'm grateful that these boundaries are not so defined as what you're trying to make them, Jacob, because to me, I want to wrestle with God. I want to know what God wants of me. I think personal revelation is really important to a healthy, mature spiritual life because not because I get to do whatever I want, but because I need to know what my particular covenants are with God. I need the freedom to make those with God in the way that I live my life. And I am not qualified to tell you what they should be for you. I'm not qualified to tell you whether taking a run on a Sunday would bring you closer to God or not.
But would you say that God has authorized certain servants on earth to dictate the terms of his covenants that he's going to have us make? Because my understanding is that covenants are something that God, through his servants, allows us to sign on to on his terms, not something that we individually negotiate on our own terms.
I see that differently, Jacob. I think that we try to reduce personal revelation to a confirmation tool, or to maybe a liahona and a decision of what is going to be best for us in the future. I think it is so much deeper than that. And this is something that I have learned in my contemplative journey. Because to me, contemplation is all about not talking about God, not making rules about what it should be without throwing out the rules. Of course, there are reasons for the rules. There are reasons for the boundaries. But my personal experience is that my relationship with God went from almost non-existent and just striving to stay in the boundaries to something so rich that has opened me up in a way to see everyone as valuable, as useful, as deserving of belonging. It's changed me. And when I look in another person's eyes, I see God. That's what I see.
And I don't doubt that a person can have very powerful spiritual experiences like that. Yeah. Spirituality and having spiritual experiences is essential. Absolutely. But at some point, there have to be some kind of theological legs put underneath it to say, what is the nature of this God? Who is this God? What does this God expect of me?
Okay. And so I put that in another category. I think we've conflated in our tradition, and most Western Christianity has conflated spirituality and religion as one and the same thing. And I think they are two different things. Spirituality is that inner stance. It's how I make sense of myself, how I make meaning of the world, how I connect to God, how I connect to creation, to the world, to you, to other people. That's, to me, that's the spiritual journey. It's the becoming a new creature in Christ. It's where we transform. It is an inner journey. Religion is the structures, it's the agreements, it's the covenants, it's the rituals, it's the symbols, the what we define as scripture, what we don't. Okay. It's the structure that helps support the spirituality. I think religion without spirituality can be anything from boring and lifeless to harmful. Okay. I think that spirituality without religion can be pretty wishy-washy, and it can kind of devolve into well, whatever. It doesn't necessarily have the strength to build an identity and a character. I think something magical happens when they come together. That I think that this was what Jesus was trying to show us. He had a problem with the religious lines that people were making, and he wasn't flouting all of them. But when he had a purpose, he did. You tell me not to touch this dead body, watch me. Here, I'm going to go do that. You tell me not to heal on the Sabbath, I'm going to go do that. He knew, and he shows a pattern in how to wisely do that. It's not willy-nilly. It's not just what you feel like. It's in the service of love. It's in the service of something higher. It's in the service of not doing harm to people.
But so I hear what you're saying there, and I don't disagree with it in large measure, but it's sort of the devil's in the details. Because love. Yeah. Okay. which is the great commandment that I think both you and I agree. The difference is you and I probably have very different ideas of what love is.
Mhm.
To love, I use Thomas Aquinas's definition,
Mhm.
which is to
Mhm.
will the good of the other as other. Okay. And to will someone's good is to will their ultimate well-being,
Mhm.
their highest good, for them to reach their highest potential.
Yep.
But that is entirely informed as to what that potential is
Mhm.
by the doctrines of things like exaltation
Mhm.
and by the
Well,
doctrines
that
of the
is for a
church.
certain type of a Latter-day Saint. I would agree with that. That is not necessarily what it is for a Hindu person, because there's
You're
never
right,
heard of it.
but I would say that the Hindu person is wrong and they don't
Mm-hmm.
understand the plan of salvation. And that's why we need to send missionaries out to the world to help people to understand the plan of God, so
Yeah.
that people can understand what is necessary, who
Yeah.
God is, and what he has in store for us.
Mhm.
Would you disagree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's got to be more to this. When I use my reason, I have to say there's got to be more to this, because there are so many people who live on this earth, so many people who have come and gone, who have never even heard of the plan of salvation. And it's not just, a few billion of them. It's like,
Yeah.
99
aware of
point
that.
whatever, 08%, whatever it is, 0.92%. It's a huge number. It is just about everybody. And so what I look at in that is that God has a purpose in this life for every life on this planet. This is not
And I
just
would
about you and
agree,
me.
but we want to give everyone, there are ideas that people have about God that are not true. And we would rather have people understand the true nature of God and his plan of salvation. Do
So
you
I
believe? Oh, go
I
ahead.
would personally rather, Jacob, that someone has a really wrong idea about what God is and live a life like I understand she's problematic, but I like a Mother Teresa. I would rather have someone be wrong about God and do what Martin Luther King did. I would rather have someone be wrong about God and do
Certainly,
what Gandhi did.
certainly. But
So
my thing is
so
why
my point is
it's not
there
an either or
has
though. It's not
Of
an either
course it's
or.
not.
It's
Of
a
course it's
both
not.
and.
Of course it's not.
We
Yeah.
would like for Martin Luther King to do what he did and have the fullness understanding of the gospel so that
Yeah.
he could participate in the work of building Zion.
Okay, so my point is you're not going to get that. Let's live in the real world. Not everybody, like evidentially, the vast majority of humanity is never going to have that in this life. This life still matters. So, no, it can't be all about that. A moral
I'm
person
not
is
saying it's
not
all
all
about
about
that.
that.
I'm just saying
Yeah.
that the reason we want people to understand the nature of the plan of salvation is because that alters what they see as the good, right? For instance, gay
Does it?
marriage may seem totally good if you think that we're only going to be around in this life for 80 years. However, if you know that exaltation, according to the scriptures, requires the union of the man and the woman in an eternal covenant of marriage, as defined by God as the union of a man and a woman, then a gay marriage doesn't help a person to reach that end.
Yeah.
Right. And
so I can see from your point of view, that makes perfect sense. And you and I are going to disagree on that because we disagree on how to discern what God's word is on that.
Yeah, and that's fine. Like, I understand
Yeah.
that we're going to have a disagreement there. My point
Yeah.
is that is the point. The point is
Yeah.
is that if we don't have an understanding of what the truth is, maybe you're right, maybe I'm wrong,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the truth,
Mhm.
the way things really are, matters immensely, because in order for me to love someone, I have to understand what the ultimate good is.
Well, what makes you think that you understand another life well enough to make that decision for them?
I'm not trying to make anyone's decisions. What I'm saying
Yeah.
is that God has revealed through his servants, the prophets, over time, that homosexual behavior is immoral, for instance, and that gay marriage is not a thing because marriage is defined by God as the union of a man and a woman. And it is requisite to have that union in order to achieve exaltation. Now, if those things are indeed true, then it would not be good for me to encourage people to enter into unions and behavior that runs contrary to the will of God.
Sure.
We simply disagree about the nature of what is true, right? But this is where the thing comes down. as Latter-day Saints,
Mhm.
it's sort of like, which side does a Latter-day Saint, what
Mhm.
side does the church and
Mhm.
all of that fall down on? And if a person doesn't, and I'm not saying they have to embrace every tradition and things like that we have. I think that we have a very low bar for what a person needs to believe to be a Latter-day Saint. But when you get baptized, you can't have whatever beliefs you want and be baptized. You actually have to affirm certain beliefs and commit to certain things in order to become a Latter-day Saint in the first place.
Sure. And we don't ask people out of the church when it's different for them. You know, I mean, we have a problem. We have a tidal wave coming at us just because I read, I don't know how long ago, a survey that was done on BYU campus of Gen Z people, and a full quarter of them did not identify as straight cisgendered people.
Yeah, I'm aware of the
That's
study.
a tidal wave coming at the church. And we are not saying, we're not inviting them out of the church, except for by their behavior, obviously, or if they marry. But that boundary maintenance is going to become more and more and more of an issue for us. It is. And
I don't think we change our doctrine, and what's true doesn't change because it's really unpopular and because a lot of people
I don't think we should change things to be popular. I agree with you 100%. It's not about being popular. It's about understanding another person's life. That's a different thing, because this is what I believe. This is how I make sense of it, Jacob, is that I have not seen evidence that a prophet, any prophet, I don't see a mechanism where God comes to them and tells them something that goes against what their culture has dictated that they already believe. I don't believe that God comes and dictates word for word what a prophet should be saying. That is not how I understand mystical experience. This is one of the things that I gained in my 2 years understanding mystical experience. That's not the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we talk about Joseph Smith's first vision as if it was a visitation. It was a vision. It's not so concrete as we believe. That's what I believe. I believe that mystical experience is much different than that.
Is that the way that Joseph described it?
Well, Joseph described it a lot of different ways, and it got more concrete over time. At first, he kind of talked about it as being an experience where he felt the remission of his sins and met the Lord. So, but he always called it a vision and never called it a visitation. Why don't we call it the visitation? It was a vision. I think we concretize things and we get we get rigid. So I don't see a place where God came to, God was working with David O. McKay. We know this about the racism issue in the church, about the saving ordinances that were denied to Black people. It troubled him. He was looking for a revelation, never quite got that. From Spencer Kimball's diaries, what we know is that he did a lot of studying on this. He was listening, he was reading Lester Bush in dialogue and highlighting all kinds of things from that. He spent hours and hours in the temple examining his own racism. And it was a precursor to him having this revelation and for the brethren getting behind that. Because I don't think that God comes to us and throws a hammer over our head and says, guys, you're getting it wrong. Elder Holland said, God has these imperfect people to work with. God knows that. He suffers us. He does. I don't think that God, I don't see it in the scriptures that the ancient prophets and people who were thinking they were speaking for God in the Old Testament say, we're so excited. God's so happy with us.
So
let me finish.
Oh, go ahead.
For bashing the heads of the women and the children against the rocks. We were really happy. God really hated the enemies of all the people of God's people in the Bible. But I think that is because that was their lens. I think that's their cultural lens. And God doesn't force us out of that lens. I think God invites us with love to see each other differently. So I know, and I've seen your debates, and I've seen how you see it differently, and I honor that. And I don't
Well,
think
it's
you're
more,
unreasonable.
I'm more curious because I want to, if I want to come
Yeah.
toward your side of it to understand it,
Yeah. Well,
and then I come to a point where I go, okay, I see what you're saying, but
Yeah.
how do you deal with this? Because here's where I come from with it.
yeah.
So what's their point? If these are
Uh-huh.
basically old guys limited by their cultural biases
Yes.
that seem to be about 15 to 20 years late getting anywhere,
Correct.
or more,
Or more.
then
I guess.
then why exactly are we saying that these are prophet, seers, and revelators? And in what sense are these guys? And in my mind, we should turn more towards social science and towards the experts that are in their fields to be able to tell us where these things go, instead of these old guys that seem to be out of the loop.
Yeah.
Why is, like, what's the point of these guys?
Yeah. So this is another thing that's been interesting in my study of the church, is to recognize that for the first, I don't know how many years of the church, Joseph Smith, if Joseph Smith was dead and gone for 50 years and you said the prophet, people thought you meant Joseph Smith. People were a president of the church. I see prophecy as being a different thing than what we call it. But I do think that the leaders of our church have authority. They have been set aside to preach wisdom, and it's just evident. It's if I look at reality, I see that they make mistakes. They say they make mistakes. They've admitted they make mistakes. There is not been anyone who sees it all the way.
But if they're not a reliable guide,
who said they're not reliable? They're just not perfect.
Well,
They're not perfect.
but I mean, are you really reliable if you get things that wrong with the priesthood, that wrong with polygamy, that wrong with gays, that wrong with, you just go down the line, that wrong on the transgender issue, that wrong on all of these issues? Like, it seems like the place to go for your guidance is the social science experts. And that's where you should, that's really who should be running the church, and we should be telling our leaders to go and listen to them over.
Well, I don't know that they should be running the church, but I sure would love for the church to listen to them. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it has to be an either or either. I think we should listen to the best social scientists. I think we should listen to the best scientists. I think we should listen to the best Bible scholarship. I believe we should listen to these things.
And I agree that we should follow that which is true. I don't think that, and Joseph Smith very clearly taught that. But the problem is that when the people who are supposed to be giving us the truth from God are not a reliable source of truth from God.
Well, here's the thing. If you look back at Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, John Taylor, all three of them would say things like, we're the true church because we are the repository of truth. And it doesn't matter if it comes from the heathen, the secular, the Methodist, it's always the Methodist. Wherever it comes from, if they have a truth, it's ours, we claim it. I never saw Joseph say, all truth is going to come through me. I'm the one, I'm the only one.
I'm not, just so we don't, like, just to be careful, I'm not saying that. Like, I believe that's one of my favorite things, that we bring all truth to Zion.
That's right.
But there is a sense in which, if on matters of faith and practice, they are not reliable.
Well, they've gotten things wrong, Jacob. They've gotten things wrong. They believed that polygamy was necessary for salvation.
I would disagree with you on some of those things. Like, the only thing that I think that they've seriously gotten wrong in the past of the church is the blacks and the priesthood issue. And I think that wasn't ever a revelation. It was always inconsistent with scripture. I don't think polygamy was.
And yet they got it wrong for lots of them. Boy, it wasn't just Brigham.
And
they got it wrong.
I think it's a very powerful example of why you should examine the scriptures and the collective witness of the prophet, and be aware of the culture of your time. One of the reasons that I have so much worry about the stance towards, for instance, gay marriage, is because it's very much a product of our culture and time, just like how in the 1800s, the racist culture that caused the ban on the priesthood was not a product of the scriptures, but was a product of the culture of the mid 1800s.
Although it's informed by scriptures too. There are a lot of racist people who use the scriptures to back it up.
The scriptures, do you believe that the scriptures support a priesthood ban on people from African descent?
Of course not.
Exactly.
But I also think it doesn't support a ban on gay marriage. So,
well, that we could get into for sure.
Totally, it's a whole thing. But that's why. But I think this is the thing, Jacob. I'm not here to say I'm right and you're wrong. I'm just telling you how I see things, because I can't make myself believe differently. I can't. You can't make me. And a lot of that is because I had the privilege of being invited to go speak on matters of faith at North Star and then at Affirmation. My circle of friends includes a lot of people that we would say are problematic. I spend a lot of time with people who have left the church. I spend a lot of time with people. Yeah. And with
gay people, to be frank. Yeah. My brother's gay. I have several gay cousins. I have a gay uncle I'm very close with. So don't think that I'm detached from this.
Yeah, I'm not saying you're detached from it. For me, getting to understand somebody, and again, it's through that, what is it like to be you? You know, I have been changed by having a very faithful return missionary come sit, not professionally, but personally, in my home, on my couch. And I was asking, as I'm going in to speak to people at the North Star, what do you need to hear? What are you wrestling with? What is your life like? And for that, just sincere, I mean, I can't even tell you the kind of family he comes from and the kind of person he is. For him to sit in front of me and to say, when I imagine a life being celibate or marrying a woman, which are the only options for me to be in this church I love, I get suicidal. When I look at someone like this, that this is their reality, this is their life, they are so sincere. And I have sat with so many of these people who are so sincerely loving both. I had one give me an analogy of, which one of my arms would you like me to cut off? Because they're so deeply part of me. And they believe and love the gospel, and they understand how important marriage is to a life and to refinement and to understanding ourselves and to really loving and deeply connecting with another human being. And it's unfathomable for me. And for me to be able to say, I know what you should do with your life, I do not feel qualified. I also don't feel qualified to tell the church what to do. I recognize their authority, that they're going to make their decisions, and they agree with you, Jacob, and they are doing the best they can, and you are doing the best can, and I'm doing the best I can. But my experiences, when I sit with those people and I think, what would Jesus do? I just think, you know what, there's so much more than we understand right now. And I don't know what that is, because I believe that God has a plan for gay people, and it does not require them to be alone. I believe that God has a plan for intersex people. I believe that God has a plan for transgender people. I believe God has a plan for mentally ill people. I believe God has a plan for all of us. And I do not feel qualified to tell people what that is. They need to tell me. They need to wrestle with God. I am here to support you with this church. I am here to support you in any way I can. But I can't tell you how you should interact with that thing. That is between you and God. Get to wrestling.
And to a certain extent, I agree.
Okay.
In that maybe you don't have the authority, and that
I do not.
And you don't feel qualified.
And I can't tell them what's going to make them happy, and I can't tell them what God expects of them. I can't.
But if we're Latter-day Saints, we believe that there are answers that are given to some of these things. I mean, like you have sort of this conception that, oh man, like no one could ever live a celibate life when Christ himself says in Matthew, he says, for there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men. And there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs, meaning not having sex, for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who is able to receive it, receive it. My issue
if someone is called to it, that's a different thing. Richard Rohr is celibate, and he chose it. And he is not suicidal.
But what if God has already called people to it? What if he has called all of us to it? And what if he expects us to bear our crosses, even when those crosses are difficult? The reality is what we're dealing with is the problem of evil. The problem of same-gender attraction and having this affliction of gender dysphoria or same-gender attraction that you have to experience and deal with in your life.
I don't see it as an affliction.
Is a great,
I see it as being left-handed in a right-handed world.
That's fine. Whatever it is, if you want to obey the standards that are set forth by the church and that we believe come from God, which you would dispute.
You believe come from God. Yes.
You're right. That you would dispute. Yes. If you're going to say that those are, then these things are challenges that we must face in our lives.
Yes.
And they're very, very difficult challenges, but there are many difficult challenges. I couldn't imagine losing one of my children. I couldn't imagine dealing with a particular disease. I have a friend of mine who was born with muscular dystrophy. I watched my friend slowly, not only did he not have the chance to have sex with anyone, he spent his life alone where he could barely use his hands to play the video games that he played.
Absolutely.
And I was one of his pallbearers at his funeral. And was that fair? Is there a loving God that does that to someone? And the reality is we live in a fallen world.
Absolutely.
We can be hit with any number of afflictions.
Of course.
And the reality is that whatever those are, we don't disobey God. We never have an excuse. We are willing to give our lives like the martyrs of old for Christ. Because obeying him and doing his will is the highest good. When I meet people like Timber Harward or Skylar, I can't remember his name, he runs the other, they're mixed orientation marriages.
I know many people in mixed orientation marriages. Know and love them.
And I know and love them as well. And I see them striving. What am I saying to them when I say, you know what? You didn't have to do this. You didn't have to make these sacrifices in your life to do things differently than your urges were. You didn't have to. But the reality is that both of those can't be right at the same time.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know and love people in mixed orientation marriages, and I know their sincerity, and I know that they are they've had to do that wrestle, and they have chosen their path.
And here's my thing, just so everyone knows. First of all, I don't advocate for mixed orientation marriages in the sense that that's what I think people should do. I advocate for celibacy as an ideal if a person is not going to enter into a mixed orientation marriage, but I also don't fault people who can't do that either, and that enter into some sort of a homosexual union. I don't attack that because I frankly, if I were in that situation, that's probably what I would end up doing myself. I don't know that I could do that. However,
and I don't know that it would be good for a person to do it.
I would never make an excuse and say the church should change what is obvious in scripture to accommodate me. Because
this is what I would say, and this is what I've told you before. One of the ways that I've felt misrepresented in the group is you tell me what I advocate for, and you've called me an activist. Jacob, what I would advocate for is giving a voice to the pain as an invitation for us to go deeper. That's what I advocate for. And so what you hear me saying in the group a lot of times is, hold up. What about these people who suffer? What about these people who suffer? Because this is another thing I know about human beings and religions and institutions, is that the people for whom it works, and this is certainly the case in our church, the people for whom it works are the ones that get elevated to leadership positions. It's the people who have put in the effort. I'm not saying it's effortless. They've put in the effort. They've put in the dedication, and it fits. And they've worked through the things that don't fit. but it works for them. By and large, it works for them. And one thing that is true about groups is that when it works for you, it is hard to imagine that it doesn't work that way for somebody else. And we actually have some blinders on that we're not even aware of like what it is to be on the margins of society, of having a problem of some sort. And I hear this a lot. You know, we talk about these kinds of things, that it's only like race or LGBT, but it is also people who have some sort of mental challenges or physical challenges and disabilities. And there's all kinds of people, single people, widowed people, divorced people. There are all kinds of people who don't fit the mold. And that's difficult. And if we are not listening to them, this is where prophecy can come from the margins, which is some knowledge of where the system is broken down that is hidden from the people at the top. This is one of the biggest problems we have. You know, we had Emma to complain about the tobacco all over the floor that brought that to Joseph's mind, that then led to the word of wisdom. That would be a healthy thing to me, to have that kind of, but what it takes is people who are willing to set aside their own experience. Because I know for me, Jacob, none of this hit my radar until I had a faith crisis. I was the first one to say there is no problem with patriarchy. Women have no disadvantage in the church. I was the first person to say that. And it wasn't until I listened to other people's stories that, and I became less mainstream myself, that I started to notice, oh, there is a problem here. Before, I would look at those women and I would say, well, you don't understand the priesthood. You don't understand that this is about service. You don't understand. There's something wrong with you. You aren't humbling yourself. You are not doing it the way, I'm so humble. Like, I've got it figured out because I'm following the prophet. What's wrong with you? When that paradigm came down and I started saying, well, what is it about you? It opened up a different way to see things. I think this is what Jesus is advocating for us to do. I think he wants us to go after the one. I think he wants us to ask them, what is it? Why is it hard to be you in the church? Like, my greatest desire would be to put myself out of a job.
But is the purpose of the church to accommodate us the way we are, or to get us to repent, to change, to become the people that he wants us to be?
Both. And we do it by accepting people and meeting them where they are. God doesn't love us when we change. God loves us so we can.
So there's a sense in which that's true, but there's a sense in which repentance is what this is ultimately about. Yeah. It's like, imagine you're talking about, does the church work for them? Well, the reality is that the church doesn't work for us. We work for the change that we need to become to play the song, right? If it's an orchestra, it's like someone saying, well, this song doesn't work for me. It's like, well, that's the song that the Lord is teaching us to play. We don't go to the church and have the church on our terms. We go to the church to ask, to learn the way that we're supposed to be, with a broken heart and a contrite spirit, in order to submit ourselves to what the Lord reveals from the top down through his servants. We don't go there and say, this isn't working for me, y'all need to change. There's just a different paradigm.
I agree with that. And that's not what I'm saying, Jacob. But what if we're saying, what if someone comes and says, this is the song of the Lord, and someone is saying, you know what, I know this amazing song over here. Would we not be enriched by saying, you know what, maybe I heard God say that was the only song, but it was really my preferences. It was really just what I'm used to. Maybe we should listen to this other song and we should all sing that song too. Like, we have forgotten what ministry is about. Ministry is not about making people into us. Ministry is about meeting people where they are, loving them, being in solidarity with them, not telling them how they need to be to have their life be
but
what it needs.
like Christ didn't go to the sinners and those other people
Mhm.
just to hang out with them. He went to them to
Mhm.
tell them to come unto him,
Did he?
change, repent,
Mhm.
follow his commandments,
Mhm.
listen to his servants,
Mhm.
so that they could find redemption from their
Mhm.
fallen state.
Sure. So I'm curious. I'm curious, genuinely. What stories are there where Jesus is with the people that society, that they were an outcast, and he was telling them to repent? I mean, he did say, "Go and sin no more." Like,
Yeah,
I
the
know,
woman caught in adultery is the first
right?
classic
But
example of that.
are there others?
Are there others where Jesus went and called people to repentance directly? He did to the Pharisees all the time.
Exactly. And who was that? That was the
They were
religious
the people
leaders
who
who
were
were trying to draw the lines.
they were the people who were abusing the authority and were basically apostates to the religion.
Mhm.
They had taken his religion and they were perverting it. They were
Exactly.
creating additional lines that weren't necessary,
That's
and they
right.
were essentially corrupting the faith.
That's
And
right.
so Jesus, one of the false narratives is that Jesus came to challenge religious authority.
Mhm.
Jesus came to assert his authority
Mhm.
as the King of Israel
Mm.
and as the Messiah.
Mm.
And so it isn't that he got rid of religion per se. What
Mhm.
Jesus did was
I
he came and
agree.
he restored his true teachings to the
I
world
agree.
that had been corrupted by apostates within the ranks.
I agree.
And so,
And how would we know if that was happening? How would we know if we're on our rammy-amptum? How would we know if we have drawn lines that
God
don't?
has called prophets to come
Mhm.
in and to basically challenge the existing authority. And if people want to
Mhm.
take that stance, if they want to say, hey, look, the church is in an apostate state and we
Mhm.
need to have these authorities coming from underneath,
Mhm.
to
So I
call
didn't
it
say that, by
to
the way.
call it out and to correct it,
I didn't say
it's
that, by the
fine.
way.
I just want people to be very honest about where they stand
Mhm.
in relationship to the church and
Mhm.
the authorities that exist and say, look, I think that God is revealing that we need to do it differently.
Yeah. So I didn't say any of that, Jacob. You're misunderstanding me again. I'm not
Okay.
saying that we should replace the authorities with these people. I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form. I'm saying we need to recognize it. We have to do our own inner work. We have to recognize our own lenses. And I'm not saying that the leaders aren't doing that. I'm just saying that it's really important to recognize how these things can happen and be clear about that. Not to replace anybody's authority, but to be more informed as the authority, to be more clear as the authority. And
And
that's a heavy burden
and
for anyone.
I agree with that.
Let me finish. No human can do that. I don't have expectations of the prophet that they are either doing everything God wants them to at every moment or they're apostate. I don't think that's true.
And neither do I.
Yeah, I don't think that's true. So I just don't want you to think that that's what I'm saying.
And that,
And I'm not saying that anyone should be replaced.
and
I'm
no,
not
and
saying that in any
I'm
way.
not. I'll clarify. Yeah, not claiming that you do. I'm just saying, is that there is in
Mhm,
history
mhm,
that when an institution has become apostate, that God has called people
mhm.
from the bottom essentially to
Yeah.
go and fix it.
Mhm.
Jesus actually modeled that himself
Yes.
as the one who was challenging the authority, and that's the reason
Yeah.
he was crucified.
Yeah. And
At the end of the
I think
day,
we should listen to prophets. A lot in the Old Testament, prophets were never the one in power. They were always on the margins, but it didn't mean they took over the kingdom. They just advised the person in charge. Like,
well,
I have no problems with hierarchies. I just think that we need to be malleable in them and we need to understand the limitations of all human beings. No one gets the mantle and is superhuman. No one gets the mantle and has visitations. It's vision. We are a visionary people. We are visionary. We are not getting this all right. It is messy. I can believe that Joseph was an amazing prophet, and I do. I mean, this was part of my experience at the living school. I was at a place where I was really struggling with the church. I was really struggling with my testimony. I wanted to not like Joseph Smith. And as Richard Rohr, he's going through, not even mentioning us as a people, he's going through the history of Christianity and all the Christian thought and Augustine and Origen and all the people all down, and also wisdom tradition. And then he gets to 19th century Christianity in America. And of course, my ears perk up. And he's telling all the things that he feels like the Reformation reformed that also weren't great. He's like, tongue in cheek. They reformed all the wrong things. We needed reform, but that wasn't it, But as he was explaining what some of those problems were, I'm like, crap, Joseph Smith fixed that one. I have this whole thing in all the margins of my pages during taking notes of like, he got that right. He got that one right. He did one better. He opened that up. Mm-hmm. I'm inspired by that. I also think the guy made some huge problems. I think he had some personality disorders. I think he had real problems when it came to polygamy, all kinds of things. I think he made a mistake. And I still see him as a prophet. I don't need my prophets to be anything but human, because that's all God has to work with. We're comfortable with that being David or someone else, some other people from the Old Testament, and Noah had some really problematic. I mean, those old prophets were pretty problematic, and we're okay with that, but we're not okay with it being the guy that we're following. I think we're all
You'll find I'm not one who holds the prophets in this that they're de facto infallible. Okay. Yeah. I don't hold that for a minute, but I do have to play with this line of reliability.
Sure.
Because at some point,
what do you do with prophets who have in writing said interracial marriage is not okay to any normal person, and it is against the doctrines of this church? What do we do with that?
I think they're wrong. I think,
are they a fallen prophet?
But
are they unreliable?
But the question is, by what standard am I judging them as wrong?
And that's the question. And
the question is the collective voice of God's prophets over time. And I think that those ideas violate the principles taught in Scripture over time. Yeah. The reality is, when I look at prophets, I look at them as a collective group. Okay, if you were to get into a room and you were to line up everyone from Adam all the way down to Russell M. Nelson, and they were all there, and all the apostles in the meantime, and all of it as one big group. And all of a sudden, Brigham Young pops out and is like, Adam is actually God. And all the ones behind him are all looking at him like, wait, what? Like, this doesn't make sense. I'm going to say, Brigham, love you, Brig, but I think you might be off on that one, right?
Yep.
There are other ones. There are things like that where within the prophetic tradition, there is actually a breakdown. Sure. You listen to Paul. There is no man or woman, nor bond or free, but we are all one in Christ Jesus. You listen to 2 Nephi that talks about that we're all like unto God. You read in the Book of Mormon how that in Zion there are no ites. You know what I mean? There's a breakdown of that. And so when I see, I have my thing isn't, I just feel this way. I have to go back to the prophetic tradition in order to look at the collective witness. I have
that back wheel too, Jacob.
Now
I have that back wheel too. And I see the same problem with LGBTQ stuff. I do. I see the same problem that we're having.
And I would say the collective voice of God's prophets over time are very clear on the nature of sexuality.
I don't think they're as clear as you think they are.
And that's fine. We can, that's obviously a separate topic, but it is. In the end, and one of the things that I think is,
can I just say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
As a collective witness, if I'm sitting in 1970, if you look at the collective witness of the prophets, at least in the Restoration up to that point, I mean, it's going to tell a different story.
Yeah, that's why I don't just take into account the Restoration.
Yeah.
That's not the collective. That's not the whole group. You're actually grabbing one group from a very particular time in history with a very particular culture that they're a part of. That's why I want to go broader.
Okay. So can I tell you something. There was one time I asked you in the group about the perennial tradition, and you asked what that was, because the perennial tradition is very much a collective witness model.
Yeah.
That
and
it is not coming from our stream, from our, what you just said. It's not just coming from this little stream. It's coming from the witness of humankind since there's been written word.
So I would say that within the perennial tradition is too broad. I do believe that there
So
are
how do you decide?
How do I decide? Because I'm a
Yeah.
Christian.
Okay.
And as a Christian and as a believer in Jesus Christ,
Mhm.
I'm a believer in the Old Testament scriptures because Jesus was a believer that they were authoritative.
Mhm.
Jesus was not quoting Buddha or
Mhm.
other writings, faith traditions at that time. He was
Mhm.
a Jew, and he held that those scriptures were indeed authoritative. And because I believe it all centers on Christ, though, because
I
Christ,
wonder if he would have if he had had access to them. We don't know that.
I don't, and that's fine. I go based on what has
Mm.
been revealed, not with just wild speculation.
Well,
And so
that's
then,
not wild speculation that he had access to Jewish people, and so that's
no,
who
but
he's
it's wild
quoting.
speculation that he ever held them in any sort of similar esteem as he did the
He
Hebrew
didn't know
Bible.
about them. He didn't know about them. He grew up in a place where
You're
the
right.
world was a little more
And that was
insular.
where he chose to reveal himself, because I actually believe in that he was the Messiah of the Old Testament, that the people of the Old Testament were actually in touch with the one true God of this world, and that Jesus Christ came into this world and as the manifestation of God in the world. And I, as a Christian, go back to him for everything. And so
Sure.
because he ordained apostles and people after him as authorities, I listen to them as well. And I'm studying Paul right now with my seminary students. And that is where I look to where does the authority reign? Who are the authorities when it comes to the nature of God? And I take that collective witness of all of them, what I would call not the perennial tradition, but rather the prophetic tradition of the Judeo-Christian tradition,
Sure.
right?
Would it
That is
surprise
what
you
makes
to
up the collective witness.
Would it surprise you to know that there are many, many, many Christians who are inspired by perennial tradition and actually believe perennial tradition?
Well, when we draw our lines the way that they're drawn, and you don't have the same borders, what you define as a Christian, what you define as a Latter-day Saint, what you define as a woman is totally different from me. So yeah, sure, from that definition, okay, but I'm not a Christian 2.0,
So I
right?
don't think it's totally different, Jacob.
Oh, well, I don't say
You
that
say I
things aren't.
define these things totally different than you, and I don't think I do.
Well, the big question is the standard by which we judge things.
Mhm.
Okay. So for me,
Mhm.
I judge the perennial tradition by Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
I judge
Sure.
everything by Jesus Christ.
Right.
What he says is authoritative, I hold as authoritative.
Mhm.
So I obviously anything that is true,
Mhm.
I grab onto,
Yeah. Well,
but
that's the perennial tradition.
not everything within the perennial tradition aligns with what Jesus Christ taught and said. And so any part of the perennial tradition that doesn't align with Christ, I reject.
What
And
part
this
of the
is what
perennial
the Book of
tradition
Mormon
doesn't align
teaches.
with Christ that you reject?
What was that?
What part of the perennial tradition do you
Depends on the
reject that doesn't
specifics. The
align?
perennial tradition is a pretty wide thing.
Yeah. I'm just curious what parts you're rejecting that don't align with Christ.
Well, there are massive parts of traditions that have existed in this world that people have held to be true.
Yeah, well, the perennial tradition isn't all of them.
You're right, but how do we decide? Well, give me a little better definition. Generally, it's the collective wisdom or truth
It
that
is.
comes from the broader tradition. So if you're going to
Correct.
define it as just those things which are true that come from humanity,
Yes.
then of course I believe in it.
Yeah,
But the
that's what it
problem
is.
is that how do we distinguish what is true from what is not?
Well,
And that standard is
that's the
Christ.
thing. Well, and that is the role of a Mormon. What a Mormon is the person who does that, who takes that collective witness. And I don't think it's just from Jesus. He's not the only one who has said the truth.
Do you believe that Jesus is the standard by which we evaluate truth?
That's the standard by which a Christian does. Yeah.
Are you a Christian?
Yeah.
So then that would be the standard that you evaluate truth
Yeah.
by, correct?
Yeah, I do. Largely, I do. And I get a lot of truth that doesn't fight Jesus, that adds some things that Buddha said. I like.
Yeah,
I like.
I don't like Buddhism has many truths in it that are wonderful,
Absolutely.
and I agree.
100%.
But again,
And
the
Jesus
question
never
is,
said it, and he kind of
it's
hinted at some of
it's
it.
kind of like
but-
we come back to this to this, and I'll just pull it quickly. This analogy of the standard, right?
Yeah.
If something aligns with it,
Yeah.
I constantly use that language, the standard by which you judge something,
I get it.
right? And if it doesn't align with Christ,
Mhm.
then it's wrong. If it
So-
does, then it's right. And
Yeah.
so he is the straight line. And you can
Right.
only tell if a line is crooked if you have a straight line to judge it by. And
Right.
so
But who gets to decide who Jesus is?
Jesus.
Yeah. Well, you and I haven't met him. He has not sat down in my living room. We have met the Christ. We have met the Christ energy. We have met that. But you and I have not met Jesus.
Has he revealed himself
the
to
flesh.
prophets throughout time?
Of course. And the prophet has a lens with which he interprets.
All right. So, and the collective voice of God's prophets acts as the standard by which I evaluate who they are the best, they are the most reliable source to understand who Christ was.
Okay.
Therefore, the collective voice of God's prophets acts as the standard by which I judge things because they are the most reliable source for that.
Okay.
My own
That makes sense to me. So here's my question. Why do we have to create the lines? Why do you care if someone who walks in and wants to be part of my ward, what they believe? Why do we care? Why do we have to say, are you really a Latter-day Saint? Are you not a Latter-day Saint? Under what circumstances do we need to do that? What's the danger? Why all this boundary maintenance?
It's so that we can distinguish one thing from another.
Well, can you do that regardless of whether
Well, and
that
I'm not, and I want to be careful. I'm not saying like if you don't believe in this particular concept of what exaltation, like if you don't believe in eternal sex and baby making, then you can't be a Latter-day Saint. That's what Joseph Smith was railing against. But we do have, and I think it's a good standard, the standard of the baptismal interview questions. If they won't allow you to get baptized and call yourself a Latter-day Saint, then shouldn't a person at least maintain those basic standards, a belief in God, a belief in the divinity of Jesus Christ, right? Because then it becomes meaningful to say you're a Latter-day Saint. It becomes meaningful to say you're a woman. It becomes meaningful to say you're a Black person or you're an African American if you meet the criteria of that thing. And that can be important for all sorts of reasons. Because
and what are those? I want to get out. I want to get out of the generalities. Like, what's the danger?
Because if someone is a Latter-day Saint saying something, people begin to believe that that is acceptable for a Latter-day Saint to say or believe or think. If people think that it is okay for a Latter-day Saint to reject the divinity of Christ, for instance, that's not okay. Like you cannot be a Latter-day Saint and reject the divinity of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
We don't kick
people. Well, we don't kick people out of the church for it. So I'm confused by that.
Well, we don't kick people out of the church for struggling with their faith. If someone is actively denying Jesus Christ publicly, we would, and if we don't, we should excommunicate them. Okay. So there's a difference between struggling with your faith and working against the beliefs. Right.
Sure.
And I don't believe we should excommunicate people that are struggling with their faith. Like that's fine. You can
Or
say,
who have a different way of looking
struggling
at
with
it.
my belief. I don't know what I believe. I'm struggling with this. But the moment that a person says, I no longer believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ, they should remove their records from the church if they have integrity. And if they publicly go out and proclaim that Jesus is not divine, they should be excommunicated from the church because the church should be the body of believers. That's what the church has to be.
So beyond believing in Christ, is there anything else you feel like?
The restoration. Like, again, the baptismal interview questions. They ask you, do you believe in God? The Godhead, essentially. Do you believe in the restoration of the gospel through the prophet Joseph Smith? And those words have meaning. Like, do you believe that the priesthood keys were given to Joseph Smith, the ones that were originally given to the apostles? Like, a person needs to believe that. If you don't, Well, then you're a Christian, but you're not a Latter-day Saint.
So what if someone stays in this place of like, I just don't know, for like decades?
That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a problem.
And
with
what if someone has said, the preponderance of the evidence to me says it's not the neat and tidy story I've been told. And man, I love being a Latter-day Saint. I want to serve in the temple. I want to serve with my brethren. I want to
you enjoy the tradition.
I want to see my children. I want to see my children married in the temple.
I think that a person is being deceptive. Mm-hmm. They should be honest with their bishop about what they actually believe, so they wouldn't be able to get a temple recommend, first of all.
Well, I've heard lots and lots of stories, Jacob, and that is totally up to priesthood roulette, just so you know.
Good. Well, I would say any bishop who allows someone to go to the temple without affirming the temple questions fully needs to be removed from that. And I would consider them for church council or for membership council for that leader, in fact, because you don't allow people into the temple that don't.
So a lot of those temples, this is something that a lot of my clients wrestle with, right?
Uh-huh.
Because they come in, and especially these belief questions, they've stopped being a yes or no question. They can't say yes or no. They're not a no. They're not a yes.
Yeah,
it's an essay question. And when they get to the essay level of the question, I will just tell you, there are bishops who are like, yep, and there are bishops who are like, no.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
If you don't say no, I don't believe in that. But the thing is that a person has to have some level of testimony of those things. Otherwise, they're not qualified.
What does that mean?
What does it mean?
Yeah.
Well, if I ask you, here's an example. Do you, and I'm asking you personally, do you believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead? Literally.
Literally, there's not a lot I know, Jacob. There's not a lot I know.
Do you have your faith that happened?
I'll tell you what it is.
Do you place your trust in the idea that happened?
I don't know. And this is what I'm saying, that this is why I'm a Christian, okay? Because I am so moved by that story, whether it happened or not. I think God can work with us, whether it happened or not. I think that a lot of the scriptures are not literal. And I'm fine if they are. I don't say they're not literal. I don't say that. I tend to believe some of them aren't. But to me, it's not about belief.
And I think a bishop in those circumstances can make that judgment call when a person gives such an answer.
Yeah.
I don't think that. Remember, there's a difference between struggling with your faith. However, I think there is a real question if someone is qualified to go and make the kind of covenants that you're making in the temple, which include giving up your life for Christ. If you are not, if I don't feel that a person in front of me is the kind of person who is ready to commit their life entirely to Christ, consecrating everything, then they're not ready to enter the temple. And if that means a lot less people go to the temple, then a lot less people should go to the temple.
Yeah. So this is how I would maybe see it differently, which is I don't think I need people to have literal belief in certain things to be serving Christ, to be giving their life to Christ. They may not even call it Christ. But
doesn't it, like, if Christ didn't resurrect, then who is Christ?
So I'll give an example. I have people close to me who have left the church. I have people close to me who are atheists. And some of these people in their professions have given their life to serving other people. That it is everything they do. And they're atheists. Here's where I start to say, I don't know that Christ cares what we call Christ. I kind of think that Christ is saying that person is doing my work. That person is doing what I asked people to come and do. And I don't know that.
Does that align with what the scriptures teach? Or is that just what you think?
I don't know. I think it's both. You
think the script, I mean, I guess, what's the point of the church then? Like, do we need the church? Like, is this just a nice social club?
No, it's not.
Then what is it?
I told you what I thought about religion. A religion is a collective of people who are doing their very best to create this structure that honors God. And we do it in a way. I mean, one way this really hits.
But we don't, that isn't what the church teaches that it is. The church teaches that it is the kingdom of God on earth, and that it is necessary to enter into covenant relationships through proper priesthood authority in order to gain our highest potential and good of exaltation. And anything less than that sells us short of it. Yeah. Do you believe that that's what our church is?
I think it is one iteration of it. Yeah.
So can a person be exalted without making covenants in our church?
So that's to be seen beyond this realm. I think the way that we talk about it, we put a lot of fences and lines up that don't make any sense. Again, to me, because we've got 99.999% of the population of the billions and billions of souls who have ever come to this earth that don't even have the option. So it can't be about just that.
But then what's the point of the temple work then?
I think the point of all the temple work is to bind us. It's to make in the flesh, to do bind what is in heaven on earth. It's to take this ethereal idea of what it is, of what we need to do to strive toward for God. It's to make that concrete. It's to make that real. It's to help remind us what it is, what path we're on in that relationship with God.
And is it not, though, as the church teaches, to help people to gain access to exaltation? That without those ordinances, they wouldn't have it.
I think without the commitment to doing our very best in this world, to seeking God and answering the call, I think that's what's necessary. And I think we have a very specific way of doing that for a very small portion of the population in this life. I think we've got a way to do that. I think it's legitimate. I think it's necessary. I also think that there is something bigger here that we don't understand, because 99.99999% of the population who has ever lived on this planet has not had access to that.
But so don't we provide it to them? We're going to provide it to them though through temple work, correct?
I mean, that's what we tell ourselves. That may be, it could be. And that's such an inefficient system. I have a really hard time getting my brain around that's the plan.
Yeah. And
I have a really hard time with that. And I have a hard time setting reason aside to do this. I have to include.
Well, and personally, I look at it like this, it's a very small leaven raises the whole loaf. Absolutely. I think that we as Latter-day Saints are like the special forces. There's only so many Navy SEALs out there in the whole world, but boy, those Navy SEALs can really change the course of human history.
Sure.
And frankly, our church right now is as big or bigger than the Christian movement was. It was started by Jesus and the original 12 apostles. So how efficient this is going to be over an eternal scale and into another realm, into the spirit world, and after the millennium and all that, it doesn't violate reason. It just may not be from the perspective that you're in right now.
Yeah, it violates my reason now. So what I take from that, Jacob, is that it's bigger than what we know. And I'm not saying we're wrong. I'm just saying I think there's more. And we've been told that this is an ongoing restoration. That's what I put my faith in. I don't put my faith in this is it. We've got it figured out. And I've got to have some boundary maintenance to see if you're on my team or not on my team. I am about saying, you know what, we've got something really valuable. We've got something really amazing that we want to share with people, to the extent that we are not doing harm. And I think we do harm in ways when we don't listen to people. I would advocate for us doing more of that work and really understanding people, and not imagining I've got to just fit you in the box that I understand. It's like, you know what? No, this is an opportunity for us to go to God and to say, what about these people? What about these people? I think we should be doing more of that.
Do you have any concern about wolves in sheep's clothing, like the church or like the scriptures talk about?
No, I have my discernment. Go be a wolf in sheep's clothing. I don't just believe you. Like
when the
I
scriptures
have
talk
my own
about the
spirit.
need for the shepherd to run
Mhm.
the wolves out of the flock,
Mhm.
do you think that that's something that the church has a responsibility to?
I think we have a responsibility to shield people from harm. I think we do. But I think we are a little overblown in what we think is harmful. I
Is
think
it harmful for people
Mhm.
to teach false ideas under the banner of being a Latter-day Saint?
I think people should be honest about where they're coming from. I don't know that there are a whole bunch of people out there saying, "I'm a Latter-day Saint and I'm the way and you should listen to me." I don't know. Are there a lot of those people? I don't come across them very often. I do see a lot of different books, some on the
Well, I
shelves of
mean,
Deseret
are
Book
there,
that
I
disagree
guess
with
the
each
thing
other.
is are there Latter-day Saints who teach things
Uh-huh.
contrary to what are being taught by the Quorum of the 12 Apostles?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, that aren't they the standard by which we evaluate if something fits within aren't the authorities the ones who determine if a person's teachings are in or outside of the boundaries?
I don't know, Jacob. I have another dear friend of mine who was part of the September 6th. Maxine Hanks. She wrote the book Women in Authority, and she was excommunicated for that in 1993, 30 years ago this month. And she spent some really quality time outside the church, and she was led by God very closely. I mean, she's one of the most connected people to God I've ever met in my life. And she was rebaptized in 2012. And in that process, she had a lot of conversations with a lot of people in authority, and she was never asked to denounce her book. So, what the authorities thought in 1993 was dangerous, if she published that today, would not have been a problem. She was not asked to denounce her work. She was not asked to stop her studies in feminism. Because the church had changed. The church changed. She didn't change. The church. I mean, she changed. People change over time, but the substance of what got her excommunicated did not change. So I don't know. I just don't think we can be as rigid about this as we think. There are people who get really upset, and the among the 15 leaders of our church, they change as a quorum over time. The 15 we've got now might think things that are very different about the 15 we had 30 years ago, and by that example and those fruits, that is true. So I don't know. I don't know. 30 years ago, she was dangerous. Today, she's not. I don't know.
Got it. Well, I'm running into a hard stop here for time, but
Sounds good.
it's been a fun interview, honestly.
It has. I've enjoyed
Obviously
talking to you, Jacob.
we've disagreed, but
Yes.
I hope I've tried to give you a fair shake here, and
Yeah, and I appreciate it.
and
I feel like you have, and I enjoy these kinds of conversations. I
awesome.
just so you know.
Well, we might have to do another one in the future. We'll see if we can make something like that happen. I
I
enjoyed
would
it.
love to do it, and hopefully we can. This can lay a foundation for us to listen to each other a little more closely when we're just doing our little snippets.
Yeah, you got to be
online.
careful. We're just snipping out. I'm firing off something while I'm in the bathroom or something. I'm going to be quicker
Same.
than if we're in a long form conversation. So
Same. And just so you know, Jacob, I respect you. I respect where you're coming from. And I respect the work that you're trying to do. And it takes all of us. I want you to know that I am not trying to erase you or your position. And I'm not trying to erase what the leaders of our church are doing. What I would advocate for is just to check our boundaries a little bit. But I make room for you. And I will say I don't always know that I feel like room is made for me. And that's hard, because I will tell you, as someone who feels harmed by people trying to make boundaries in a certain place, like, I deserve to belong in this church. It's my people, it's my heritage, it's what inspires me, and it's where I serve, and it's the people I love. And I would advocate that we stop trying to get rid of people like me. I think the church is better with me.
well, just so you know, I'm not here trying to get rid of anyone. That
Right.
ultimately is something that's left to church authorities. I do think that there
Absolutely.
are lines sometimes that we need to
Mhm.
be careful of, that I think people can cross. Obviously, we have a difference of opinion there, but
Well,
I
but
care
hear
about you,
me.
and
I did say we should have lines.
Okay.
Yes.
And well, we could probably go round and round and continue this
I
for a
know.
long time.
I'm both and. I'm a both and girl.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for
All
coming
right.
on, and I
Take
hope
care,
everyone
Jacob.
has a good rest of their day.
Thanks for having me.
So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it.